Welcome back, everyone, to Digitalize in Stockholm. Welcome back, everyone, live in the audience from the breakout sessions. It's time for another keynote speech. It's titled Client-Side Scanning or Child Protection. Digital technology can increase the risk of violating personal integrity and safety. The child sex abuse regulation is the top item of the digital policy agenda in the European Parliament. It could potentially undermine end-to-end encryption by taking power to mandate client-side scanning, not just for illegal images, but also for text messages. In this keynote, Professor Anderson discusses if such measures would work in practice. Is population scale text scanning really effective? Is it even legal? And what is an effective alternative to client-side scanning to really protect children? Ross Anderson is a professor of security engineering at the universities of Cambridge and Edinburgh, and he's a fellow at the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering, and he also won the Lovelace Medal, Britain's top award in computing. A warm welcome to our event here in Stockholm, Professor Anderson.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, what's on top of your research agenda this fall?
We're working on a number of things. At the Cambridge Cybercrime Centre, we collect vast amounts of data on bad things online. We collect data on cybercrime, and we also collect data on extremism of various kinds. A second thread of research is adversarial machine learning. We know how to cheat people. We have got thousands of years of experience of that. So how can you cheat robots? And we then have a number of technical strands of research, including my colleagues who work on the Cherry project to make the next generation of ARM processors capable of fine-grained access control. And we also do research on hardware tamper resistance on issues such as how to reverse engineer smart cards.
Such interesting topics. I wish I was on your team. We'll get an insight into your research in your keynote. I leave the stage to you, Professor Anderson.
Great, thank you. So the title of my talk today is Client-Side Scanning or Child Protection. And the deep context for this is the crypto wars, the attempts that have been made over the past 30 years by intelligence and law enforcement agencies to retain the information dominance that they had during the Cold War. Now, during the Cold War, export controls were used to prevent civilian cryptography proliferating, and the philosophy was very much like preventing arms proliferation. And so cryptographic hardware required export control licenses, and this was only granted for things like automatic teller machines and the hardware security modules used to manage their cryptographic key material. After the Cold War, and with the arrival of software cryptography, when everybody had PCs that could do cryptography, there was a different regime that the US government attempted to impose. The Clipper chip was supposed to replace DES for encryption and had an NSA backdoor. And here in Europe, there was an attempt to mandate access to keys through CA licensing. And that was eventually defeated by the European Commission in the year 2000 with the Electronic Signature Directive. From then until, roughly speaking, the Snowden revelations, the agencies focused on access to servers, and the PRISM system enabled them to get access to all the email. After Snowden disclosed that, people went to end-to-end encrypted messaging, and since then, the agencies have been demanding access to devices. Now, there's a number of themes run through this whole opera. And the latest thing that we have to, and I discuss these in papers with others, keys under doormats in 2015 and bugs in our pockets in 2021, where we did a careful analysis of the various demands that were made and the things that could go wrong with them. Now, the thing that's currently on the agenda in Brussels is the child sex abuse regulation, which Commissioner Johannson was pitching just last week to the Levy Committee of the European Parliament. And this regulation would empower the EU to compel providers such as WhatsApp to scan chat messages before they were encrypted or after decrypted, as well as filtering images on your phones. And the big question is, should this power be granted? Now, laws with similar provisions are being proposed elsewhere. Here in Britain, we've got the Online Safety Bill, which is stalled because of the chaos in our government, but which they threaten to bring back to Parliament. So the important thing is that this is a worldwide policy initiative that is coordinated by the various signals intelligence agencies, and it's popping up in one legislature after another. So the agency's argument is set out in a paper that appeared in July called Thoughts on Child Safety on Commodity Platforms by Ian Levy and Crispin Robinson. Ian Levy is the chief defence person in the UK signals establishment GCHQ, and Crispin Robinson is the director of cryptanalysis. He's the main attack person. And this paper is being cited by Commissioner Johannson in debates in the European Parliament. Now, what this basically proposes is threefold. Firstly, there should be mechanisms like photo-DNA to discover known illegal images. And photo-DNA is basically a 28 by 28 grayscale thumbnail of an image. And you can't put such thumbnails of illegal images into devices because you can use machine learning techniques to reconstruct the photos. You can see individuals, you can see illegal sex acts. The second thing is that you've got machine learning mechanisms for detecting child nudity. These have started to be rolled out anyway by one or two providers such as Google. And we saw recently a case where somebody in America had an infant son whose penis was inflamed. He phoned the medical practice. The nurse said, please send us a picture. They did. The doctor provided antibiotics. The child was cured. And yet Google's mechanisms flagged up this as an abuse image. And the individual not only received a visit from the police, but he had all his Google accounts stopped permanently. So there are risks of false alarms with both of these. And photo-DNA, incidentally, also has about 10% false alarm rate. And the third is a proposal for mechanisms to scan text before encryption or after decryption to detect grooming, that is, sexual approaches by adults to minors. And there's also discussion about extending this to terrorism by looking for texts about radicalization. Now, the social context of this is violent crime against children, and that's the context in which we should analyse it rather than the requirements of signals and intelligence agencies. Now, child homicide is a significant problem, and worldwide about 100,000 children are unlawfully killed every year. The typical perpetrator is the mother's partner, and it's important to realise that this is just the tip of a very large iceberg of abuse, most of which is simple neglect. Children whose parents, whose step-parents or whose carers simply don't love them or don't care for them. This is often associated with multiple deprivation, with poverty, with slums, with unstable families, with alcohol and drug use, and with gangs. Now, in rich countries, the rate of child homicide is less. In the UK, we've got 180 to 200 per annum. And given that Britain is 1% of the world's population, we'd expect 1,000. But, we get about a fifth of that because, we're a rich country with reasonable social services, with a functioning police force, and so on and so forth. And I've no doubt that the pattern in Sweden is somewhat similar. Now, when we come to child sex abuse, we don't have statistics that are as solid and as universal because different countries measure child sex abuse in different ways. They collect data in different ways. Some don't collect very much data at all. But as far as we can tell, the patterns of child sex abuse are not hugely different from the patterns of other violent crimes against children, or indeed the pattern of child neglect. These are tied up together. So, what do crimes of sexual violence against children look like? Well, there's a number of studies from a number of countries from which emerges the fact that most of the abuse is in the family, 60, 65, 70% is in the family. And where you've got multiple offenders offending against the same child, then the primary abuser is very likely in the family with probability over 80%. Other offenders tend to be people who are local and in a position of trust. We've heard about scandals about priests molesting children. There are also offences conducted by teachers, by policemen, by doctors, and others. The role of technology in this is interesting because technology is very often used for surveillance and control of victims. And one of the things that we're studying nowadays in the information security world is the abuse of technology in intimate partner violence. That is where typically someone is abusing their wife or their girlfriend, although very often this extends to child abuse as well. And one of the things that we've learned is that our existing information security mechanisms are not very good at this. You advise people to change your password, but how can an abused woman change her password? Her partner will just beat her up if she does that. And if she makes an attempt to escape, then of course he knows how to answer the password recovery questions. Another related issue is revenge porn, non-consensual intimate images, which arise in a number of contexts against adult victims and against child victims. So returning back to the case of child abuse, there is an amount of abuse that's initiated online, and this is primarily sextortion. This has been the leading cause of harm initiated online to children since. What typically happens there is that children are tricked into sending images to predators who pretend to be other children, and then they're blackmailed into producing more images or abusing other children in the family or whatever. And very often, this is an online equivalent of the kind of grooming that occurs in real life, in that pimps and other people involved in child trafficking target young teenagers who are neglected and who don't have anybody who loves them, and they chat them up and, yes, you're gorgeous, and escape with me and we'll live together. And then perhaps within 6 months they're working on the street. So there's a prostitution recruitment aspect to this as well. And finally, there are crimes of sexual violence which work transnationally, where you've got streaming video being sold to abusers in rich countries, coming from countries like Mexico, the Philippines, Thailand, Iraq, Somalia, where law enforcement is absent or corrupt. Now, there is a particular emphasis in the Levy-Robinson paper on the indecent image pipeline, because images of abuse are typically found when users report them, and then they're sent to the US National Council for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, which collates images using this system PhotoDNA, Microsoft system that 20 years is equivalent to image thumbnails. And a number of server-based systems, not just Microsoft's Hotmail, but also Facebook and Gmail, have been scanning images for years now. And US law requires that they report to NCMEC. They get about 30 million hits a year, mostly from Facebook. And when we dive down into the statistics, we find that about 100,000 of these hits a year are sent to the UK police. About 10% turn out to be false alarms. The great majority of the rest turn out to be duplicates. They lead to several thousand arrests and 700 prosecutions for indecent image offences every year. To put this into context, we think that there's about 750 prosecutions come as a result of this pipeline, out of about 22,000 prosecutions for indecent images. So it's a relatively small contribution to indecent image prosecutions. And these offences peaked in 2016. The police view now in the UK is that it's more important to prioritise primary offences, where people are actually raping children, rather than secondary offences, where you've got people looking at old images of children that they somehow got online. So although indecent images offences are real and do create secondary victimisation of children, the police view is that they are now a smaller priority. And yet it is these indecent image offences that are used by the EU while pushing the child sex abuse regulation. This is all made more complex by issues around sexting, sextortion, and revenge porn. About a third of teens in most developed countries where we have data flirt by sending naked images to each other. And the problem here is that under US law, and indeed under UK law too, you commit a crime if you send an indecent image of yourself when you're under 18. Now, this isn't the case in every European country. In Britain, the age of consent for sex is 16. In Germany, people are only considered children up to age 14. I believe in Denmark it's 15. And so it's quite possible that two 16-year-olds who are in a perfectly legal and loving relationship and who send pictures to each other are committing a serious crime under US law, and they get reported to NCMEC. A real problem, though, is that if a couple of teenagers fall out and end their relationship, then one of them may put the other's images online or threaten to. And this is an issue in schools. School bullying happens, and about 15% of kids report some sexual victimization. The rate is higher for gay kids than for straight kids, but it's a significant minority. And the problem facing school teachers in the UK and elsewhere is that the strict criminal liability associated with indecent images, particularly if they're reported to central agencies, means that teachers have difficulty dealing with sexualized bullying. Right? It's normal if a child punches another child that this is not instantly reported to the police, at least not for the first offence. But if, on the other hand, there's some sexual harassment, if this goes online, then there can be rapid escalation, which involves the police, which involves the children ending up on the potential register of sex offenders for the rest of their lives. That can have bad effects if in later life they, for example, want to apply for a job that requires a security clearance. The other problem with this is that it makes it harder to spot the serious cases, such as when pimps are trying to recruit minors for prostitution. So there's a signal to noise issue caused here by the way in which images online are dealt with. There's another confounding factor, which is the feminist scholar's viewpoint. Now, this is something that we've come to take very seriously in our group over the last year or two, as we started to collect data about violent online political extremism. Because feminist scholars have discovered that misogyny is strongly linked with crimes of political violence. And they also point out that crimes of violence against children are linked with violence against women, and that violence against women, including online violence such as revenge porn, is largely ignored by tech measures and police agencies. The really interesting thing here, which I wasn't aware of, but I've been convinced by the evidence, is that the great majority of terrorists commit crimes of violence against women first. There's a study, for example, of all the terrorists who have killed people in Europe since 2000, and over 80% of them first committed a crime of violence against a woman acquaintance or a woman in their family. And so what this teaches us is that the dangerous guy in your local mosque isn't the guy who downloaded a US Field Army manual, but the guy who beat up his sister. Now, up until now, the police agencies have been looking for the guys who downloaded the US Field Army manual, and they should instead be relying on local knowledge, and they should be taking reports of violence against women seriously. So in this context, could text scanning help? Well, our experience looking for hate speech in large corpora suggests that NLP techniques will have a 5% false alarm rate. The European Commission in its internal consultations suggested 10%, and they then said that if you got 1 million grooming messages, then this new agency would be able to cope with 100,000 false alarms. And that's the kind of false alarm rate that you currently get with photo DNA. But when you start doing text scanning, then the arithmetic was simply wrong, because there's about 10 billion text messages sent per day in the EU. And if you report 1 billion of these to Europe's 1.6 million police officers, then they each have to check an awful lot of messages per day. So how would you make this work? Would you let policemen refine each search progressively like with a web search? Well, that gets you into a whole separate set of problems, which have to do with the architecture and which have to do with human rights. The first thing is the issue of subsidiarity, because if what you want to do is to improve child protection, then you've got to support the people who actually protect children. You have to support local police, social workers, teachers, and parents. And at present, the centralization of processing child sex abuse messages is getting things wrong. And creating a new central agency like Europol to take the place of NICMAG is not going to solve that problem. The second thing is that we have to learn from past mistakes. Now, during the run-up to and the aftermath of the EU Data Retention Directive, some countries like Germany retained all traffic data between 2008 and 2010. Other countries, such as Sweden, didn't transpose the retention directive at all and so didn't do mass surveillance. And other countries like Switzerland kept on going because Switzerland didn't follow the judgment of the Luxembourg court that this was illegal. And the statistical analysis shows clearly that the data retention, which created lots and lots of records of IP addresses, didn't help with either the detection of crime, the deterrence of crime, or the conviction rate for those crimes that were detected, even although in theory you would have thought that having good logs of IP addresses would have helped in the case of child sex abuse offences. It didn't. And then, of course, the showstopper is human rights, because bulk intercept without warrant or suspicion has been found contrary to privacy rights by both the Strasbourg court and the Luxembourg court. So this holds even in Britain, where since Brexit we only acknowledge the Strasbourg court. But, fundamentally we have to ask ourselves, what's the purpose of this? And if the purpose is to maintain democracy under the rule of law, then human rights have got to provide the boundary conditions. And for that reason alone, the child sex abuse regulation should be rejected. So policy lessons. The agencies claim that large-scale growing harm is initiated online and is preventable by client scanning is not supported by the evidence. Second, crimes of sexual violence against children are real, but effective prevention means fighting poverty, more child social workers, and more police effort on family violence. And third, the one useful tech policy reform is better reporting. That's already been mandated by the EU Digital Services Act, and the focus of both police and civil society groups and tech firms should be on making that work. So for more, I've got a paper, Chat Control of Child Protection, which sets all this out at the following ARXIV number, and that plus stuff on the online safety bill and our previous papers on this can be found at my website. And as it happens, European Digital Rights is starting a campaign on this issue right today. And so with luck, you will see that in the mainstream press as well. So many thanks for the invitation to talk here, and I'll take questions.
Thank you, Professor Anderson. Thank you. This is really the backside of information society, isn't it? And it's grim to see that the measures to limit harm do not seem that effective. Can you tell us about what the reactions of policymakers when you present them, for example, with the challenges of text scanning?
Well, 2 weeks ago, I went to the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham in England as a guest of people who were organising a session there on the online safety bill. And I found that the members of Parliament who had been interested in this issue had not turned up, except for one member of Parliament who had become a minister. However, I found in a room of about 90 people that there was almost overwhelming support for the proposition that we should not be extending surveillance to people's chat messages. So at least among conservative activists, there is strong support for privacy. Whether that extends to government is, of course, anybody's guess. And given the current political chaos in the UK, we don't know when the online safety bill will come back to Parliament.
I'll take another question from the audience. What are, in your opinion, some other of the worst technologies that are currently hurting rather than helping? And could you please discuss some directions toward countering them?
Well, among the existing websites, some firms take some efforts to enable people to report illegal and distressing material. None of them are very good because there's, reporting costs the companies money. Facebook's perhaps the best of a bad bunch. Google is significantly harder to get in contact with. And the worst of all at present is Twitter. And so if you want to make the world better by forcing the tech companies to pay attention when people complain, it's Twitter you should beat up on rather than WhatsApp. And the fact that the European Commission is trying to beat up on WhatsApp suggests that this is being driven by concerns about signals intelligence rather than by concerns about child welfare.
Other harmful technologies or solutions?
Other harmful technologies, in addition to online social networks, like Twitter, are smart home technologies. Because if you've got things like Ring doorbells and Amazon Echoes and so on, then these can also be used by controlling and violent men to impose surveillance and control on the women and children in their household. And you also have to think about all sorts of other devices that are marketed as smart. You have to think about fitness trackers. You have to think about AirTags. We've got a project on that. There's all sorts of smart technologies which can be abused. And very often companies which launch new products don't stop to think about the abuse potential. For example, I haven't heard of anybody thinking about the abuse potential of virtual reality headsets.
Another question from our audience is how to sensitize the digital architecture creators on the issues of the Child Security Act, the Child Sex Abuse Act.
Well, we already have a number of regulations around digital rights. There are not just the various abuse provisions, but there's also, for example, general data protection law. And it's hard enough to get developers, particularly in America, to pay attention to that because this is seen as a European thing, as an annoyance that you have to fix up afterwards. And things, I think, will really change once America acquires its own body of law about privacy protection and about child protection. Until then, the European Union has got very great regulatory power because Europe is a big market. And it's good to see that this power is being used more and more.
In your opinion,
and it's interesting
in your opinion, is GDPR a sufficient level of sort of basic protection of human rights?
It's not a sufficient protection because at present the tech companies manage to hide in Ireland, and the government of Ireland has for 30 years now made it a matter of high national policy to do everything they can to attract the European headquarters of US firms, including by making Irish privacy protection a joke and by making Irish corporation taxes the lowest in Europe. And that's why such things have to be done using mechanisms such as regulations rather than directives, so that you can end up having the same law applied equally throughout the European Union. And then there are issues around enforcement, as various law cases brought in Ireland by Austrian NGOs and others have pointed out.
This is another question. In your opinion, what else can academia contribute to in terms of providing means of prevention for child abuse online?
Well, one of the projects that we have in our lab is investigating better ways of having panic buttons, escape mechanisms from online services, so that if a child finds themselves in a position where they feel under stress or embarrassed or under pressure, there's some button that they can press in order to escape from that session and, if need be, capture data for use in evidence. And this isn't just something about social media, of course. It applies equally to gaming platforms. I mean, the only place where my 9-year-old granddaughter has been solicited by creepy and unpleasant people is on Roblox. She doesn't go on Facebooks. So another problem with such rules is, how do you apply them to gaming platforms as well?
With that, we'll end. I'll do a hand up. Hand up if this session was valuable to you. I can only see it in the room. This is a 99% hand up, Professor Anderson. Thank you for contributing to our event.
Well, many thanks for the invitation. It's a shame I couldn't be in Stockholm in person with you, but perhaps at some future time.
Yes, thank you.